My parents skipped my graduation. They said it was just a trivial event and told me not to bother them. Then, my mom posted Hawaii vacation videos with my sister. 1 week later, my dad called saying, "The loan payments haven't been made." I replied only, "Don't contact me." Hi, my name is Natalie Morgan, and I am 24 years old. I was born and raised in Portland, Oregon, in a 2-story white house with a carefully painted wooden fence, a front yard that was always green and neatly trimmed. My father, David, proudly told the neighbors that his family was the perfect American model. My mother, Ruth, the dedicated homemaker, 2 obedient daughters, a tidy home, and what looked like a happy life. To anyone looking in from the outside, our family seemed flawless, but the truth inside was far from the image my parents worked so hard to create. From a young age, I was fascinated by science and writing. I would spend hours in my room with model kits or notebooks filled with scattered words and little ideas. I loved asking questions, recording the results of tiny experiments I invented myself, and at one point I even created a science magazine out of cardboard to show off to the family. But when I eagerly handed it to my mother, she only glanced at it, forced a smile, and said, "Natalie, you dream too much. Do something more practical, like Emily." Emily, my sister, 2 years older than me, was the shining star in my parents' eyes. From the very beginning, she was good at socializing, spoke fluently, and always knew how to charm adults. Whenever guests came to the house, Emily would quickly pour drinks, chat cheerfully, and make everyone laugh. Meanwhile, I, shy and often hiding in the corner with a book in my hands, was constantly compared to her. "You need to learn from Emily. She has leadership skills and will take this family to greater heights." I heard that line so many times that I grew sick of it, to the point where I sometimes wondered if I even belonged to my parents, because nothing I did ever seemed good enough to make them smile with pride. There was one time, when I was 10 years old, that I entered a small science fair at school and unexpectedly won first place with a model of the water cycle. I ran home clutching the certificate, my heart racing with excitement, convinced that this time my parents would finally be proud. When I held the paper out to my mother, she gave the briefest nod, a faint smile, and said, "Yes, that's good, dear." Then, without another word, she turned away to hang up a poster from the high school beauty pageant Emily had just competed in, even though she had only made it to the semifinals. That evening, the whole family gathered in the backyard for a barbecue to celebrate Emily's achievement. Neighbors were invited, laughter filled the air, while my certificate was left forgotten on the dining table, stained with drops of barbecue sauce. I sat in the corner, hugging my knees, swallowing back tears I couldn't let fall. Moments like that repeated themselves throughout my childhood. Emily was bought a dazzling dress for the school dance, while I was handed an old notebook to scribble things in. When Emily won a speech competition, my parents called the relatives to celebrate. But when I earned top marks in science, all I got was a flat, "Good, keep it up." The balance in our household always tilted to one side, and it was never mine. As time passed, I learned to stay quiet. Instead of rushing to share the essays I worked so hard on, I tucked them into drawers. Instead of hoping for praise, I wrote in a diary to comfort myself. Those messy lines of ink became the only place where I felt heard. I often wrote, "If I got an A today, would my parents finally smile at me?" Or, "I gave everything I had, but maybe I'm still not good enough." Each page soaked in the longing for recognition, yet equally filled with disappointment, because deep down I knew that wish would never come true. When I entered high school, I began to realize that if I kept waiting for attention or investment from my parents, I would never have the chance to move forward. While my friends had parents by their side, guiding them through class selections and encouraging them to join clubs, I wandered the halls on my own, seeking out the most dedicated teachers in school, knocking on their office doors to ask for materials and advice. I remember once when my science teacher, Mr. Patterson, was surprised to see me show up on my own, asking how I could get involved in the school's laboratory. He said, "It's rare to see a student this proactive. I'll look into letting you join a small research group." From that moment, I found my own path, a place where my efforts were acknowledged, even if not by my own family. While I was in the lab after school, wearing gloves and carefully recording every result from my biology experiments, Emily was often seen driving out of the school gates in the shiny new car my parents bought her for her 16th birthday. That image cut deep. I walked home along the leaf-strewn sidewalk, arms wrapped around a stack of books, while she was cheered on by our parents as she drove off in the golden afternoon light. I used to wish for just a fraction of that affection, but it never came. To my parents, investing in Emily was the family's bright future, while I was expected to take care of myself. Gradually, I grew accustomed to being on my own. After school, instead of hanging out with friends or heading straight home, I went to the library. There, I could sit for hours among the towering shelves, breathing in the scent of old paper, finding a sense of peace I never found at home. I learned how to research on my own, how to apply for partial scholarships to summer science programs. Each time I received an acceptance email, I was so excited I wanted to run downstairs and share it with my parents. But whenever I tried, their reaction was nothing more than a flat, "That's fine, but don't neglect your chores." After a few times, I stopped telling them. I kept my joy to myself and shared it only with Mr. Patterson or a few close friends. The coldness from my family forced me to build a hard shell around myself. I learned not to wait for praise, not to hope for a ride, not to expect a hug after school. I did everything with my own two hands, from walking miles home to getting a part-time job at the local bookstore just to afford study materials. During those days, I realized that I possessed a resilience Emily never had. Emily had all the support in the world, but I had independence, a priceless, invisible asset that I would only come to fully understand much later in life. There was one particular moment that became a turning point in my teenage years. At 15, after an evening filled with quiet bitterness as my mother went on and on about Emily's achievements, I returned to my room, my heart heavy with resentment. I pulled open the drawer, took out the notebook I usually used for assignments, and began to write. At first, it was only a few scattered lines. "They never see me. I feel like I don't exist." But slowly, writing in that journal became a habit. Every night before bed, I poured out my feelings, from the sadness of being overlooked to the tiny, fragile dreams I still carried. Those pages became my only true companion, the one place where I felt listened to. I wrote about lonely afternoons in the library, about standing in silence while Emily was celebrated, about my determination to prove that I could succeed too, even without anyone standing behind me. The high school years passed, and Emily continued to shine with parties and social accolades, while I quietly built up my academic achievements. I earned partial scholarships thanks to my performance in science, and that gave me the chance to inch closer to my dream of attending college. My parents hardly noticed, only lighting up with pride when Emily won a debate competition. By then, I had stopped hoping they would ever change. I knew that if I wanted a different future, I had to create it myself, with my own strength. And so, amid the coldness of my family, a new version of me began to emerge, resilient, independent, able to swallow the pain and turn it into fuel. Stepping into the University of Washington in Seattle felt like the world had suddenly opened up to me, so much wider than the suffocating little town of Portland and the quiet years of high school. I chose to major in data science, a field that was both challenging and captivating, because I had always been fascinated by uncovering patterns hidden within dry numbers. At first, I felt overwhelmed by the competitive atmosphere and the fast pace of learning, but at the same time, I saw a glimmer of hope here. No one cared that I was Emily's little sister. No one compared me to some golden standard. I was simply Natalie, a freshman learning to carve out my own place. During one of the introductory classes, I met Liam Walker, the teaching assistant for the course. He wasn't much older than me, maybe 26, but his eyes lit up whenever he spoke about mathematics, algorithms, and their real-world applications. I remember the first time I handed in an assignment, Liam asked me to stay after class. My heart pounded wildly, certain that I had made a mistake. But instead, he gave a gentle smile and said, "The way you solved this problem is really creative." Have you considered joining the professor's research group? He's looking for students who think differently. I was almost stunned. No one had ever told me I was creative. No one had ever encouraged me to take things further. I nodded, and from that moment on, Liam became one of the most important companions on my journey forward. Not long after, I met Sophie Tran, a classmate from my introductory communications course. Sophie was the daughter of a Vietnamese family living in California, with a radiant smile and a captivating voice. We happened to sit next to each other during a student seminar and struck up a conversation. When I briefly mentioned how my family favored my sister, Sophie's eyes softened with recognition. She shared that she too had grown up in a household that valued her brother more, where she constantly heard phrases like, "Girls just need to think about getting married later. Boys are the real foundation." We both laughed not because it was funny, but because we had finally found someone who understood the pain we had each carried alone for so long. Sophie became my closest friend, the one I could call in the middle of the night to vent or to share the weight of a long, exhausting day. The first years of college were anything but easy. I had to balance my studies with part-time jobs just to make ends meet. I applied to be a teaching assistant for a few introductory courses, grading papers and organizing study groups to earn some extra income. On top of that, I took on freelance work, analyzing data for small startups around Seattle. There were nights when I stayed up until 3 or 4 in the morning, my eyes burning from staring at the computer screen. But whenever I saw even a small paycheck land in my account, I felt a burst of joy. It wasn't just money, it was proof that I was sustaining myself, that I didn't have to rely on anyone else. Liam often stopped by the lab, bringing me coffee whenever he saw me working late. He patiently listened as I rambled through messy ideas and showed me how to shape them into clear research topics. He would say, "You have a way of seeing the bigger picture that most people miss. Don't underestimate yourself." Those words became the motivation I needed to start applying for departmental research projects. Sophie, on the other hand, was my everyday anchor, the friend who pulled me out from behind my computer to walk around Lake Union, eat ice cream, or simply sit in the dorm listening to music. She reminded me that I wasn't just a brain-crunching data, I was also a human being who needed joy and connection. Gradually, I began to notice the change in myself. From a girl who once poured her sadness into diary pages, I was becoming someone confident enough to present ideas in class, to stand up and debate in seminars, to take on big projects even if it meant countless sleepless nights. I was no longer just Emily's shadow. I was becoming myself, a Natalie with my own value, my own voice. And even though my parents never once called to ask about the projects I worked on, even though every conversation with them revolved only around Emily and her dazzling achievements, I slowly learned not to seek recognition from them anymore. I had Liam, I had Sophie, I had colleagues and professors who truly saw me. Most importantly, I had myself, and I knew the path I was on was leading me toward a future I was building with my own hands. In my junior year of college, our department research team began working on a project that would change so much for me. Building an artificial intelligence model capable of predicting climate change in the Pacific Northwest. The work stretched on for months, with thousands of hours spent gathering data from weather stations and satellites, then cleaning, analyzing, and training the model. I remember those long nights in the freezing computer lab, the constant clatter of keyboards, the glow of code streaming across the screen, my hands trembling from exhaustion while my eyes still burned with excitement. For the first time, I felt that I wasn't just studying to pass a class, I was doing something meaningful, something that could impact the community. When the model was completed and produced results beyond expectations, Professor Patterson, who guided our team, suggested submitting the findings to a regional scientific journal. I didn't expect much, but just a few weeks later, a local newspaper published an article about our young research group. In that article, my name was mentioned specifically as the one who played a key role in optimizing the model. I remember holding that paper in my hands, my heart racing. For the first time, my work was recognized publicly, not hidden in the pages of my diary, not just in Liam's encouragement or Sophie's kind words, but out there in the world for everyone to see. That evening, I sent the link to the article to my parents by email. I sat in front of the screen, hands trembling, waiting for a reply. I thought, maybe this time would be different. Maybe when they saw my name in print, they would smile, call me, and say, "We're proud of you." But a few hours later, only a short message from my father appeared on my phone. "Yes, that's good. But Emily was just promoted to project manager at her law firm, such a proud moment." I stared at the screen, my throat tightening. Even in the moment when I wanted to share my greatest joy, they still managed to turn the story back to Emily. It seemed that in their world, only Emily was worth celebrating, while all my efforts were nothing more than a small footnote in the margins. I sat silently in my dorm room for an hour, feeling as though that article, that sense of pride, had just been stolen from me. Liam came by, saw me with my head bowed, and pulled up a chair beside me. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. I handed him my phone, eyes stinging. He sighed, placed a hand on my shoulder, and said, "You don't need their approval. They may not see it, but I do. And you deserve every bit of recognition for what you've achieved." Soon after, Sophie called me on video, waving the newspaper she had picked up from a stand near campus. She shouted, "Natalie, you're amazing. I'm so proud of you." Then she made me retell the details of the research so she could write a congratulatory post on her social media. In that moment, I realized something important. My happiness didn't always have to come from my parents. I had other people who truly saw me. Yet even knowing all this, deep down I still hurt. Because no matter how many times I told myself not to expect it, I always longed for the day my parents would set Emily aside and look at me, just me. But with every indifferent reaction, every comparison, every time they brushed off my success to highlight Emily's achievements, the truth carved itself deeper. They would never acknowledge me. I began to teach myself to change my expectations. I still sent the occasional email, still called to check in, but I no longer waited for their praise. Whenever my mother picked up the phone, her voice was always rushed, quickly shifting the conversation back to Emily. "She just got praised by her boss. Emily is about to join a big project. We're thinking of buying another apartment for Emily to invest in." I would sit there, listening, forcing a smile, and hang up with a heavy emptiness in my chest. And yet, every time I thought about giving up, I saw Liam's patient encouragement, Sophie's loud cheers, and the respectful way my research colleagues looked at me. Those things kept me standing tall. The first successes of my life didn't bring me the love and recognition from my family that I had always longed for, but they gave me a greater lesson. My worth did not depend on whether they saw it or not. It lived in the fact that I had dared to take steps forward, dared to try, dared to turn pain into motivation. And yet, there were still nights when I lay staring at the ceiling, asking myself why my parents couldn't just once say that they were proud of me. But then, I would slowly take a deep breath, open my worn-out journal, and write words as a reminder. They may not see me, but I see myself. I exist, and I am worthy. That graduation day finally arrived, the day I had both dreaded and anticipated for the past 4 years. The Seattle sky that morning was a brilliant blue, with white clouds drifting lazily as if to mark the milestone of my life. I put on my navy gown, secured the square cap on my head, and stepped into the grand hall amid a sea of students buzzing with laughter and excitement. My heart pounded furiously, caught between thrill and dread, as my eyes swept over the stands, searching for familiar faces. In my imagination, I had seen my mother's gentle smile, my father waving proudly, even Emily, despite her busy life, showing up to support me. But in reality, all I saw were rows filled with cheering parents calling their children's names, while the seats reserved for my family stood utterly empty, cold, silent, haunting. That empty chair cut straight into my heart like a blade. Amid the chorus of laughter and applause, only Sophie stood up, waving brightly, and Liam smiled warmly, his eyes urging me to keep moving forward. I forced a smile in return, swallowing the disappointment deep inside, and told myself I had to keep walking. And then the moment I had been waiting for finally came. My name echoed through the speakers not just to receive my diploma, but for something more. The announcer paused, his voice formal and steady. And this year, the award for outstanding research valued at $25,000 and certified by the Scientific Council goes to student Natalie Morgan for her work on climate prediction using artificial intelligence. I froze, taking a few seconds to realize that it was me. Applause erupted, the hall roaring like a wave. Students around me cheered, clapping me on the back in congratulations. I walked up to the stage, my hands trembling as I accepted the certificate and the envelope. My heart felt like it might burst with happiness. This was the moment I had dreamed of through all those lonely years, to be recognized, to be honored, to finally prove that every effort had not been in vain. And yet, as the lights shone bright and the applause thundered, my eyes drifted, almost involuntarily, toward that empty row of seats. The place where my parents should have been, the place where they should have stood to clap like every other family. For a moment, joy and sorrow blended together. I smiled, but tears pricked at the corners of my eyes. I heard Sophie shouting from the stands, "Natalie, you're amazing." I saw Liam stand up, camera in hand, snapping pictures, his face glowing with pride. I bowed in thanks and stepped down from the stage on shaking legs. Inside me, a painful question echoed. If my parents had been here just once, would everything have been different? After the ceremony, friends rushed into the arms of their families, their hugs overflowing with pride, their whispered words of, "You did it," cutting into my heart like a blade. Sophie pulled me aside for a picture, and Liam placed a steadying hand on my shoulder, saying, "You did amazing, Natalie." I smiled, forcing myself to respond, but inside there was only emptiness. As the crowd slowly dispersed, I held my phone tightly, hoping for at least one call or message from my parents. Then the screen lit up with a short text from my father's number. "Don't bother us. This is just a trivial event. Leave us alone." I read it over and over, my heart shattering into pieces. A trivial event? So, the 4 years I had struggled, every ounce of effort, every night I had worked myself to exhaustion, was it all reduced to just that? I slipped my phone back into my pocket, the weight in my chest crushing me. That night, back in the dorm, I turned my phone on again, clinging to a thin hope that my parents might send another message, that maybe it was just a moment of anger. But instead, the screen showed a new post from my mother on Facebook. A bright video of the Hawaiian sunshine, where my whole family, my father, my mother, Emily, and her fiancé were laughing together on the beach. In the video, they raised their cocktails, the sound of waves crashing in the background, with a caption that read, "Congratulations, Emily, the pride of our family. A well-deserved vacation." I froze, my heart squeezed tight. Not a single word about my graduation. Not a single mention of the award I had just received. Only Emily. It was always Emily. I sank onto the bed, tears spilling down my face, dripping onto the phone screen. The feeling of abandonment was no longer a quiet ache, it was laid bare for the whole world to see. While I stood on stage accepting a prestigious award, they were celebrating an extravagant vacation with my sister. While I longed for one word of encouragement from them, they were busy boasting about Emily, the pride of the family. In that moment, I understood that success meant nothing if the people you loved most dismissed it. My friends had family photos filled with laughter, while I had only a diploma, a certificate, a $25,000 award, and a cold emptiness where love was supposed to be. I had once believed that if I just tried hard enough, if I achieved something truly remarkable, my parents would change. But the truth was different. In their eyes, I would always be just a shadow, an ordinary piece of the family not worth noticing. And on that fateful evening, as tears blurred my phone screen, I realized the road ahead could never be built on their affection. I could only rely on myself and on the people who truly saw me. A week after graduation, when the mix of joy and sorrow still lingered in me, my phone suddenly buzzed. On the screen appeared the words, "Dad, David Morgan." My heart skipped a beat. A part of me, though I had told myself not to hope, still longed for a belated congratulations, some hollow but comforting words like, "We're proud of you." I took a deep breath and answered. But the dry voice on the other end crushed whatever hope I had left. Natalie, we need to talk. The student loans still aren't paid off. You need to help, especially now that Emily is getting married and the family needs more money. I went numb, my ears ringing. I remembered every scholarship I had earned, every hour I had worked in the library, every freelance data analysis project I had taken on, pushing myself to exhaustion just to pay for my own tuition. I had paid everything off myself. I had no debt left. So why was my father saying this? Then, in a chilling instant, the thought struck me. They had just found out about the $25,000 award I'd received at graduation. Was this the real reason for the call, not some loan, but a pretext to squeeze money out of me, to funnel straight into Emily's lavish wedding? I forced myself to stay calm and asked, "What are you talking about, Dad?" I paid off every cent of my tuition on my own. Every single installment with my own money. On the other end, I heard his quickened breathing, then his voice hardened. You're forgetting the $20,000 loan we took out in our name. We covered you, and now it's time you pay it back. This is for the family. And Emily deserves a proper wedding. You should think of your sister. I froze, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles ached. In the background, I heard my mother's voice cut in, gentle but deliberate. That's right, Natalie. You should know how to sacrifice for your sister. We've already done so much for you. The whole family has already done so much for you. I almost laughed bitterly. The image of the empty chairs at my ceremony, the hollow silence as I searched for them, and that video from Hawaii still haunted me every night. They hadn't been there when I achieved the greatest milestone of my life. And yet now, only a week later, they had the audacity to demand money for a loan that didn't exist. Also, Emily could have a perfect wedding. That very night, I opened my cabinet and pulled out every box of documents I had. I spread them across the table, each stack heavy in my hands. Every bank statement, every payment receipt, I had kept them carefully, because deep down I had always known I couldn't rely on my parents' support. I turned the pages, my hands trembling but my eyes steady. And just as I remembered, every single student loan had been in my name, and I had paid them off 2 years ago. None of it was connected to my parents. I even called the bank to confirm, and within minutes they sent me an email. The student loan account of Natalie Morgan has been fully settled. No outstanding debt remains. I sat still, my shaky hand resting on the stack of papers. The raw truth stared back at me. My parents had fabricated a lie to pressure me into paying for Emily's wedding. A surge of fury erupted inside me. I thought back to the moment I had stepped onto the stage to receive my award, tears in my eyes because my family wasn't there. I thought about the Hawaii video, where they raised their glasses and toasted Emily as the pride of the family. And now, everything came together into one clear picture. I had never been their priority. They were even willing to twist the truth, to erase my efforts, just to drain money from me for Emily. The bitter thought burned in my mind. They didn't show up for the biggest achievement of my life, but only a week later, they already found a way to take from me. I took a deep breath, picked up the phone, and called my father back. This time my voice was cold, every word deliberate and sharp. "Dad, I've checked the records. Every loan was in my name, and I paid them all off with my own money. The bank has confirmed it. There is no debt. Don't ever call me about this again." On the other end, my father hesitated, his voice faltering. You're mistaken. This is for the family, Emily." I cut him off, my tone like steel. "I don't owe anyone anything. And don't contact me again." I pressed the button to end the call, my hands still trembling, but my heart strangely light. In that moment, I knew I had crossed an important threshold. For the first time, I wasn't seeking recognition, wasn't begging or trying to convince. I had stood up and taken back control of my life. I was no longer the 15-year-old girl quietly writing in her diary to swallow her sadness. I was a grown woman, capable of saying no when being trampled on, and ready to cut ties with what had once wounded me. After that final call with my father, I sat in silence for hours in my room, the glow of my laptop screen casting tired shadows across my face. I knew I had done the right thing, but inside I still felt tangled, as if an invisible thread hadn't yet been severed. The anger and pain sat like a stone pressing down on my chest. Liam noticed the unease in me. He sat beside me, wrapped his arms around me, and said gently, "Natalie, you can't let them keep hurting you. You need someone to help you set boundaries." I looked up at him, and in his eyes there was no judgment, only genuine concern. I nodded. Maybe it was time to seek out someone who could guide me out of this cycle. A few days later, following Sophie's advice, I went to the office of Dr. Helen Brooks, a psychologist. Her office was in a red brick building near downtown Seattle, with windows that looked out over a green park. The room was bright, decorated with a few abstract paintings, and the beige upholstered sofa radiated a sense of safety. When I began to speak, my words stumbled at first, but then years of repression broke open. I told her about my childhood lived in Emily's shadow, about the empty chairs on my graduation day, about the text my parents sent, about the Hawaii video, and finally about the phone call demanding a loan that never existed. I broke down, tears streaming as I said, "They've never valued me, and now they've even fabricated debt just to take my money. I don't know what to do anymore." Dr. Brooks listened intently, her eyes calm and understanding. When I finally stopped to wipe my tears, she spoke. "Natalie, you've lived too long in a system that made you believe your worth depended on recognition. But the truth is, you've accomplished so much on your own, and they never saw it. What you need now is to set boundaries. Boundaries aren't about fighting someone else, they're about protecting yourself." I sat in silence, letting every word sink into my heart. Boundaries, a simple concept, yet one I had never truly allowed myself to draw. That session ended with an assignment. To write down what I wanted to say to my parents, but had never dared to. Back at home, I pulled out my old journal. For the first time, I wasn't writing just for myself, but preparing for a decision. I wrote, "From now on, do not contact me about any financial matters. I owe nothing. Do not contact me again." As I put those words down, my hands trembled, my heart pounded, but at the same time, I felt a flicker of relief. The next day, I met Liam and Sophie at our usual cafe by Lake Union. We sat at the table by the window, the afternoon sunlight slanting through the glass. I placed my journal on the table and opened it for them to read. When Sophie finished, her eyes blazed. "Exactly right. You've let them cross the line for far too long. It's time they know you're no longer the fragile girl you once were." Liam took my hand, his voice gentle but firm. "I know you're afraid, but you deserve peace. Write the email. Sophie and I will be right here with you." That afternoon, the three of us drafted the email together. I sat in front of my laptop, my fingers gliding over the keyboard, each word typed out like a brick building the wall that would protect me from harm. The message was short but resolute. "From now on, do not contact me about any financial matters. I owe nothing. Do not contact me again." I reread it several times, then added one final line suggested by Dr. Brooks. "Any further attempts at contact will be ignored." Staring at the screen, I felt as though I was standing on a ledge, one step away from crossing into a new life. I hesitated for a few seconds, my heart pounding like a drum. Liam gave my hand a gentle squeeze and whispered, "You're doing this for yourself, not for them." Sophie leaned in, her smile full of encouragement. "Send it, Nat. I'm proud of you." I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and pressed send. A soft ting confirmed the email had gone through. I sat motionless, tears spilling down my cheeks, but this time, not from pain. They were tears of relief. Right after that, I opened my contacts, blocked my parents' number, then went through every social media app and hit the block button. With each click, it felt as if I were loosening a chain that had been wrapped tight around my neck. When it was done, I leaned back in my chair and let out a long breath. Inside me was an emptiness, but it was a soothing emptiness, like the calm space left behind after a storm has passed. That night, I wrote in my journal, "For the first time in my life, I don't have to fear the sound of the phone ringing. For the first time, I'm no longer haunted by the need to please them. I'm free. And it was true. In the quiet darkness of my small room, for the first time in years, my shoulders felt light. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, there would still be struggles, still moments of regret, but at least I had taken the first step. Choosing myself. After I sent that email cutting off contact, a strange silence settled in. At first, I thought my parents would lash out, call nonstop, or at the very least send an angry email. But no, there was nothing. Complete quiet. I knew their silence wasn't out of respect for my decision, but because they were already finding a way to twist the story to their advantage. And sure enough, just a few weeks later, whispers began to spread among the relatives. My cousin Mary was the first to call me. Her voice shook with anger as she said, "Natalie, do you know what the whole family is talking about right now? People are saying your parents skipped your graduation to go to Hawaii with Emily. And then, afterward, they even demanded money from you to fund Emily's wedding. Is it true?" I froze, then answered slowly, "It's true." And that's exactly why I had to cut ties. On the other end, I heard her sigh, her voice breaking. "It's shameful. Who treats their own daughter like that?" From Mary, the story spread quickly. Aunts, uncles, and cousins who once respected my parents now began looking at them differently. At family gatherings, I heard later that the whispers grew louder. They only ever cared about Emily, while Natalie was abandoned. It's so unfair. Some didn't bother whispering at all, saying openly. They always bragged about being the perfect family, but inside it's nothing but favoritism and selfishness. Those murmurs, passed along in calls and messages, soon built into a wave of outrage. In Portland, where my family lived, the neighborhood began to buzz as well. Neighbors who were used to seeing my father trimming the lawn every weekend and my mother mailing out polished Christmas cards now muttered behind their backs. Turns out it was all just a facade. They skipped their daughter's graduation to vacation in Hawaii with the other one. Someone even shared that they overheard David at a small gathering, bragging endlessly about Emily. But when asked about me, he simply waved a hand dismissively. Nothing worth mentioning. Those words spread quickly, fueling gossip throughout the neighborhood, and the image of the perfect Morgan family began to crumble piece by piece. Emily couldn't escape the consequences either. Her fiancé, Matthew, came from a well-off, respectable family. His parents heard the story from my relatives, and during a dinner, they asked Emily directly, "Is it true that your family skipped your sister's graduation to go on vacation? Is it true your parents even asked her for money to fund this wedding?" Emily's face flushed red as she stumbled through an explanation, insisting it was all a misunderstanding, that her parents had always loved both daughters. But Matthew stayed silent, and his mother replied coolly, "A family that values fairness would never act that way. That makes us reconsider." After that dinner, Matthew began to distance himself from Emily. A mutual friend told me he had said, "If they can treat their own daughter like that, then they're capable of doing the same to anyone." The cracks were clear, and for the first time, Emily felt the weight of the damage our parents had caused. I didn't feel joy in seeing it, but I didn't feel pity either. Because I knew this wasn't me seeking revenge, it was the inevitable consequence of favoritism and cruelty. My parents, David and Ruth, who once proudly boasted about their two daughters wherever they went, now found themselves unsettled. At the grocery store, neighbors asked, "Why don't we see Natalie around?" At church, some people began to keep their distance, no longer greeting them warmly as before. The family portrait my mother once proudly displayed in the living room, Emily in her high school graduation gown, my parents standing on either side, while I was pushed to the edge, had now become proof of favoritism in the eyes of others. Everything they had worked so hard to build, that reputation of being a model family, was crumbling under the weight of the truth. From Seattle, as the news reached me, my feelings were tangled. Part of me felt relieved, because finally someone else could see what I had endured. But another part of me felt bitter. Why did it take such an explosion for people to notice? Why, after all my silent cries for years, had no one listened? Yet when Sophie hugged me and said, You don't need to carry the blame for their downfall. This is the result of their own choices. I knew I had to let go of the guilt. Looking back, I saw it clearly. One small act in email cutting ties had set off the chain of dominoes that brought everything down. I hadn't done anything to smear them, I had only spoken the truth and protected myself. And the truth had its own power, spreading beyond their control. With every whisper in Portland, with every disappointed glance from relatives, the reputation my parents had polished for years was unraveling. And that wasn't revenge I had sought, it was justice I never thought I would have. When one door closed, another began to open. After graduation, I was hired by a mid-sized tech company in Seattle as a data analyst. At first, I thought it would just be a temporary job to gain experience, but to my surprise, the environment became the place where I finally found the recognition I had long craved. I worked hard, never hesitating to take on difficult projects, often staying late at the office to perfect reports, checking every number, every chart. And the results spoke for themselves. After only a year, I was promoted to lead analyst, put in charge of a major project for an international client. When the company director announced my promotion in front of all my colleagues, I stood there listening to the thunderous applause, my heart both overwhelmed and at peace. This time, I didn't need my parents' validation, I knew my worth was real. Through it all, Liam was by my side. He saw every night I carried my laptop home, staying up until 2 or 3 in the morning to run models, and each time I collapsed in exhaustion at the table, he would place a hot cup of coffee in front of me. "You don't have to be perfect," he often said. "Just being yourself is more than enough to make me proud." Those simple words were enough to soothe the wounds I had carried for years. Our bond grew stronger, steadier than anything I had ever experienced. Then, one evening, as we strolled around Green Lake with the sunset spilling across the water, Liam suddenly knelt down and held out a small ring. He said, "Natalie, you've built a life of your own, and I want to walk with you through everything ahead. Will you marry me?" I broke down in tears, nodding and threw my arms around him as a few passers-by clapped and cheered for us. Our wedding wasn't grand or extravagant. We chose a small restaurant overlooking the Seattle Bay, where the warm glow of golden lights reflected off the windows and created an intimate atmosphere. The guest list was short: just Sophie, a few close friends from college, trusted colleagues, and Liam's family, who had long treated me as their own daughter. Sophie was my maid of honor, dressed in a pale blue gown. She held my hand before I walked down the aisle and whispered, "You deserve this day, Nat." When I reached Liam and saw the radiance in his eyes, when I heard his vows spoken in a trembling yet steady voice, I knew I had finally found where I belonged. There were no empty chairs haunting me like on graduation day, no heavy comparisons weighing me down. For the first time in my life, I felt embraced by a real family, a family I had chosen, one that truly cherished me. I continued therapy sessions with Dr. Helen Brooks. She patiently listened and helped me peel back the layers of heavy memories, little by little. Once, she asked me, "Natalie, when you think about the past, what do you feel most, anger or regret?" I thought for a long time before answering, "Both." But above all, I feel relief that I finally got out. Through each session, I learned how to forgive, not to excuse my parents' actions, but to forgive myself for having once longed so desperately for a love that never existed. I learned to accept that while the past shaped me, it did not define me. My journal began to change as well. If before it had been filled with complaints and questions with no answers, now it brimmed with plans and dreams. I wrote about the projects I wanted to pursue at work, about the little house Liam and I hoped to buy on the outskirts of Seattle, about the trips we longed to take together. I even wrote about the hope of having a child someday, with a promise that my child would grow up surrounded by love, never having to endure the feeling of abandonment I once knew so well. There were nights when I sat by the window, watching the city lights shimmer across the water, and I felt an unfamiliar peace within me. I knew the journey of healing was far from over. Old memories would return, at times bringing pain. But now, I had a stable career, a husband who loved me deeply, a best friend who felt like a sister, and a new family ready to shelter me. That was enough for me to believe that I had finally found my true worth, not in my parents' recognition, but in the life I was building day by day. Looking back on the road I had traveled, I saw a different Natalie, no longer the invisible child pushed to the margins of her own home, but a grown woman who stood firmly on her own 2 feet, built her own career, and, most importantly, found a new family that truly loved and cherished her. The fractured years of my childhood hadn't broken me. They had forged me into someone strong, independent, and certain of what she deserved. I had once longed for a look of approval from my parents, but now I understood. My worth was never in their eyes. If there is one thing I want to say to you, the one listening to my story, it is this. Family is not just blood. Family is made of the people who choose to stay, who respect you, who love you for who you are. You don't need to beg for affection from those who only deny your worth. Don't let anyone else define your value but yourself. Be brave enough to set boundaries, and if you must, choose yourself. I believe that everyone carries their own wounds. Maybe you too have been abandoned at the most important moment of your life. If so, share your story in the comments below. And tell me, where are you listening from? I'll read every word, because your story deserves to be heard too.